I'd always wanted to go to New York. It was a place that I'd seen represented in so many films, I'd heard so much about. It sounded exciting, but I didn't know quite what to expect. When I got there, in some ways it felt like the rest of the world. But then I got to Central Park, the main place that I was looking forward to going to see, and the only word I could think of to describe it was idyllic. Utterly idyllic. I actually felt like I was in a Renoir painting because of the social aspect of it. It was a place where there always were people. It wasn't overcrowded, but then again, it wasn't lonely. It seemed to have just the right amount of people there. And the warmth of the sun, and we were there right in the evening. It was like nothing I'd experienced before. There was a painting called The Manor at Dawn, or something like that I've been waiting for almost 2 years to see at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When we got there, we were actually early, and as a result of that, we were actually some of the first people to get into the museum, me and my dad. And so when we got into the Impressionist section of the museum, it was almost empty. It was like a church, so quiet. Very few people were there. It was so unlike my usual experience of art museums. I looked around and saw this painting. It was just as I imagined it, just the same size, had just the same luminosity, and looked as though it had just been painted. The freshness of it. It was stunning. There's a film called Little Manhattan. It was released back in 2005 that very few people seem to have actually heard about. And that was all shot, hence the title, in New York. And I have never seen a better film that represented Manhattan. It represented it beautifully. And in the film, there was a park that featured. It was actually called the smallest park in New York City. It was this park. It was so small that I could not find it. I walked up and down the street twice. I couldn't find it, even after being told where it was. So I went back the next day, and I did find it. It was very much like I thought it was going to be, except possibly even smaller. It was really just a pathway, more than a park. We went inside, me and my dad, and we found these two men. Turns out that the black American who you see there was actually one of the 5 guitar players in Strawberry Fields memorial to John Lennon, and he actually offered up to play a Beatles song for us. I didn't know it, but my dad certainly found it very moving because he'd been brought up with the Beatles. And it was extraordinary to hear this song being played so in a place that was so close to where John Lennon had lived and was shot dead in 1980. And a place where Yoko Ono, his wife, still lives. When I walked into the park, the African American said, "Hey, you look like Leonardo DiCaprio!" I was quite startled. I found the park to be just as I thought it was going to be. And actually, after I left, it was the main place that I wanted to paint. So that's partly why I took so many photographs of it. On the last day, I took a walk up to Brooklyn Bridge along the East River. I couldn't quite describe it. Everything felt so enormous. and I felt so small in contrast to everything around me. The weather was perfect. It was at about the same time of day that it was when was in Central Park. On the last morning, we went back to Central Park to the boathouse that you see here. Before that, on the way there, we walked past the Basuda fountain. And I was just standing there, and there's this man who walked along with this young lady. He asked me to take a photograph of them. I did. I gave the phone back to him. So he switched the phone camera setting to video and gave it back to me. He said, just one more. And suddenly he got down on one knee and he produced a wedding ring and he proposed to the lady. I filmed the whole thing. She was quite emotional because of it. We then went and had a drink at the boathouse, just as we had at the beginning. And then after that, we went back to the hotel and got into the car to take us to the airport. And amazingly, just as we walked into the car, it started raining.